Hello, pirates. Today's topic is speciation, and what we're looking at today is how do new species form to produce the amount of biodiversity that we have today. So in order to understand speciation and species, we first want to start with what a species is in the first place. And a species is a population, so we're over here looking at what it means to be part of a species. It means that you are a population of organisms. So this is a population that interbreeds and produces fertile offspring. And the process of speciation is just the process of how those species form in the first place. So when we're looking at speciation, which is our topic today, with speciation, we're looking at how these species form. So this is the formation of a new species. So where do new species come from to create this biodiversity? And really it all begins with a process or something that we refer to as reproductive isolation. Okay, so reproductive isolation happens when, so here we have reproductive isolation. This happens when a population becomes isolated from the rest of the group. So a population becomes isolated and it no longer interbreeds with the original group. Now, there are a few different ways that this can happen, that a group of organisms can be isolated from the original group. And we're talking about reproductive isolation, meaning they can't mate with one another. The first type of reproductive isolation, the way that they could get separated, is by a geographical barrier. Okay, so the first one is going to be that they could become separated by what we call geographic isolation. And geographic isolation means that you are separated by geography. And this geography that you could be separated by, it could be something like an ocean, the mountains. It could be a river, a valley. Or maybe you're stranded on an island. So all these things would be types of geographic isolation. I'm just going to draw little mountains up here. Here we have the mountains. They could separate you, a river. Maybe we'll put some ice on those mountains. All right, so one form of reproductive isolation is you become separated by geography. The second type of reproductive isolation is that you could become separated by behaviors. Okay, so there is another thing called behavioral isolation. And behavior isolation and reproductive isolation means that changes in behaviors or habits are going to prevent one group from mating with the other. And it's kind of like you're more likely to mate and meet someone that does the kind of things that you do or is in the places that you are. So, for example, what are your feeding locations? If we have a group of deer that always dine or always go to get a drink at a specific pond, they're always going to meet the deer that also go to that pond. If the other deer are going to a different watering hole, they're going to meet those other deer. So the feeding locations or drinking locations are going to be one behavior. Another could be when you're awake. The other day you had that example with worms, like being nocturnal or diurnal. Being nocturnal or diurnal, well, the nocturnal worms are going to meet other nocturnal worms, and the diurnal worms are going to meet other daytime diurnal worms. So your behaviors will dictate who you're likely to meet and mate with. Okay, so behavioral isolation. The last one on here is what we refer to as temporal isolation. So a group become reproductively isolated by temporal isolation. Now, temporal isolation means that you might have different mating seasons. So it could be, for example, that in a group of fish, maybe some of the fish release their eggs in the spring and the others release their eggs in the fall. So they have different mating seasons, spring versus the fall, or winter versus summer, or they don't even have to be opposites like that. It could be that maybe one group is mating a little earlier in the spring and the other group is mating a little bit later in the spring. And as a result of that, eventually they could lead into, creating different groups or different species. Do flowers for the spring and some little maple leaves here, or some little leaves to represent the fall. All right, so there's 3 types of reproductive isolation, ways that populations become isolated from each other for mating. So geography, their behaviors, or by seasons when they are actually mating. The other question that people have about speciation is people wonder, well, how long does this take? When we're talking about evolution, we said that this is something that can take a very long time. It can happen slow and gradual. So evolution and speciation could happen at a slow, steady pace. And just kind of very slowly, one species branching out from another. So here's our original species, and then it could branch into 2, and that one could branch into 2, and this one could branch into 2. So it could be very slow and steady. And this could take, again, thousands, if not millions of years. The other type of speciation is things could happen through what we call punctuated equilibrium. So they could have really rapid change, and then things might remain the same for a while. And then they could change again, and then go unchanged for a while. So with this, we might have that original species and just this constant branching off, okay, of that species through reproductive isolation. All right, what you guys are going to do with your speciation story is you guys are going to pick a group of critters, and you guys have lots of different critters there, and you can draw your own, but you're going to create an original population. You could use the birds, you could use the fish, and with your original population, you want to cut them out and explain what they are. You want to separate them geographically. Then you want to have a trait chosen for by natural selection, provide a mutation in your population, and then an additional mode of your choice. And then you want to answer questions about your species. An example that I have from last year is going to show you guys kind of like this. So here we have a population. They get separated by the mountains. We have island and mainland birds. Natural selection, yellow in one location, green in the other. A mutation for beaks and feathers until they become different, okay? So you guys kind of want to use something like this. You could have spring versus fall fish. You could have nighttime versus daytime, but you just want to create a speciation story, and that is what you're going to submit. So explain how a species comes into being Let me know if you have any questions.